Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With the new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
If we didn't win this election, if we had these people that were running, that were ruining our country, destroying our country with their open borders and transgender from everybody and windmills all over the place, if we allowed that to go on for another couple of years, I'm not sure that we'd even have a country.
Welcome to Quiet Riot, the politics podcast that is less 1922 committee and more 1992 Hello Kitty. I'm Alexandro.
And I'm Naomi Smith. We're here to help you navigate the news with brevity, levity, and a little devilry.
Our aim is simple: to talk with you rather than at you, and to debate rather than dictate, all while giving you calls to action to make our world a better place.
So snuggle up, sip that pumpkin-spiced vegan milk latte, and help us begin another Quiet Riot. Quiet Riot.
Hello and welcome to Quiet Riot. I'm Alex.
And I'm Naomi.
And I'm producer Kenny, here to keep those two from going off on tangents about kitchen appliances or alien Earth.
Now, before introducing the topics we'll be covering this week, some listener feedback, a correction, in fact, about something we may have got wrong last week, because at Quiet Riot, we don't bury things like that on page 15.
No.
We give them due prominence.
Indeed.
After last Sunday school I did with Kenny, a man called Alistair wrote in, identifying himself as Lofty, to complain about Kenny's recollection of his first holiday in Greece. I don't remember drinking any aftershave, writes Lofty. He is defaming my good character. Kenny didn't mention when he was drunk and sent a postcard of a fully excited Priapus to a female friend of ours. I was the one trying the local food, and some of it fantastic, while he stuck to pasta. Apart from that, it was a fantastic holiday and experience. Keep up the good work. Lofty, we apologize for any distress we may have caused. Kenny has agreed to send you a bottle of Aqua Velva for Christmas.
Lofty, send me an email and I will send you some aftershave to drink. Fabulous.
We need to talk about what we're going to be chatting through today.
Correct.
So on today's show, I think we need to take stock of the Conservative Party conference that was dominated by Jenrick freelancing and Badenoch bristling.
And we'll be hearing from our resident Chevalier, Olivier Morel, about the transformation of French politics into a Spanish telenovela, following the resignation of Prime Minister Le Cornu after just 27 days at the helm.
And 2 years on from that horrifying Hamas attack, we look at the chances of the latest attempt to end the killing, as well as the global rise of anti-Semitism. To help us and making their Quiet Riot debut, it's genius mind, author, commentator, and Substacker extraordinaire, Sam Freedman.
Hello, very nice to be here.
Welcome, Sam. Your Substack, it's quite incredible. And I think it's motivated a lot of people to start substacking themselves, but none have come close.
Well, I've created my own competition. It's terrible. Well, the thing about Substack is you really have to work at it very hard to keep it going. You have to write something once or twice a week, every week. You can't sort of do it very part-time.
Or it'll punish you on the algorithm.
Yeah.
Or...
Well, or not even that. Just you need to constantly be putting content out there that's good and high quality. Otherwise, people won't engage. And I think a lot of people think they can do it in a very part-time on the side of things way, but it actually, to do it properly, it's become not quite a full-time job for me, but not very far off. But it's really great fun being able to write about whatever the hell you like without an editor telling you you're not allowed.
Yeah, your splendid book, Failed State, Why Nothing Works and How to Fix It. I read a review by your old history teacher.
Yes.
Nick Hillman, who writes, and I quote, "Teaching teenage Sam was a tricky job because of his curious mind."
So it's a very polite way of putting it.
Reading between the lines, exactly how much of a nightmare smarty pants were you?
I was particularly annoying to him because history is the subject I've always loved the most. The best story is when I was, I think, 13 or 14, we had a lesson where Nick asked us to bring in a source from home to then discuss in front of the class, a historical source.
And you brought in the Magna Carta.
Well, my dad at the time was writing the official history of the Falklands War. So he had a pile of official secrets documents from the Cabinet Office in our house. And I just took a bunch of letters from Margaret Thatcher off the top of this pile and presented them at my source. And then Nick saw official secrets on the document. They were covered by the Official Secrets Act because Dad had special dispensation while he was writing the official history.
But you did not.
And I did not. And neither did my history class. So he freaked out a bit of that. So it was, I was an unusual student, shall we say.
When I was about 7, we had to, on a Monday morning, do creative writing about our weekend. And we had to write about what had happened at the weekend, but it was meant to be factual storytelling, not made up. It was around the time of Salman Rushdie having published the Satanic Verses. My parents had taken me to Oxford to a party that my parents' friends were hosting, and Salman Rushdie was there. And I'd sort of got it all a little bit jumbled in my head about what I'd been told. And so I'd written that I went to an underground party where Salman Rushdie was there. He's hiding because people want to kill him for writing a book, something like that. And I think I wrote about it being underground, and we went underground. We didn't, it was just dark, but my parents had been trying to tell me, he has to live his life in the shadows because of the fatwa.
Right.
I got it all jumbled. So it was
yeah.
sort of part fiction, part what we'd done that weekend. And I remember getting into trouble and the teacher saying, no, you were meant to write what you'd actually done. You went to swimming lesson, played with your friends, hopscotch on the curb. And I was like, no, I really did. And I sort of took great umbrage at having...
Your lives are so much more exciting than mine, because I used to have to do that exercise as well. The teacher said, like you, something that happened this weekend. So my story for that day, and it was illustrated.
Your teacher's going to write in, you do know this. So be very
seared into Miss Matthews' mind, this one. Yeah, my story for that day was, my wee sister done a stink in her pants. Complete with a drawing of pants with a stink.
I played the Islamist preacher in the premiere production of Hanif Qureshi's Black Album at the National and then on tour, and got to burn the Satanic Verses every night for a year and a half, including with Salman in the audience.
Oh, wow.
So that was a very interesting
Has he forgiven
experience.
you?
I chatted to him afterwards. The play was anti...
of course.
What was the security like then backstage? Or did you just all keep your fingers crossed? If you were creating controversy on stage?
The main thing was not setting the theatre on fire, to be honest. We had like loads of fire officers with buckets of sand.
Ready to
go every time I came off, because I actually set the thing alight on stage and then
they had to switch off the smoke
brought
alarms.
it off. Yeah, they had to switch off the fire alarms, correct.
At the time of recording, leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch, has just closed the Conservative Party conference with a speech that started out with jittery nerves, but hit many of the notes the membership faithful were hoping for. Promises to scrap stamp duty, reverse VAT on private schools, scrap family farms tax, undo the Workers' Rights Bill, take the UK out of the ECHR, scrap the Human Rights Act, deport immigrants, wean disabled people off benefits, reduce the size of the civil service to pre-2016 levels, cut the deficit, increase stop and search, ban doctors from striking, and abolish business rates on the high streets.
People want to know what I stand for? I stand for a government that takes less of your money and doesn't interfere in your life, where those who create wealth are welcomed with open arms, not driven from our shores, where reward matches effort, where Britain stands tall in the world. I stand for an economy where profit is not a dirty word, where enterprise is supported, not crushed. I stand for a country where actions have consequences, where we talk about responsibilities as well as rights, where the welfare of victims outweighs the welfare of criminals. I stand for a society where free speech trumps hurt feelings, where everyone knows what a woman is, where people are judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, where the vulnerable are supported, but where freeloaders are told where to get off.
The day before, the Tories' answer to Andy Burnham, wannabe leader Robert Jenrick, whipped up racist rhetoric when a recording emerged of him bemoaning having not seen a single white face in an hour and a half while filming a video about litter in the Handsworth area of Birmingham. Badenoch backed him up. Mel Stride and Andy Street did not. And so the infighting continued, but between a vastly reduced rump of delegates, empty seats, unfilled exhibition space, and a lacklustre fringe, sent signals that reinforced the poll ratings. This is a party in rapid decline. Sam, you noted that certainly on the first couple of big days of the conference, only the Express had given them a splash on the front page. So when even most of the right-wing media are no longer interested, just how irrelevant has this party become? And do you think the speech today will have helped, or is the country just completely tuned out from anything they have to say?
I mean, I think at the moment they're completely tuned out. And that does tend to happen when you've been in government for a very long time and then you're in opposition. I think the press is a really big problem for them, more in a way than the voters at the moment, because the voters are always going to be tuned out at this point. They need the press to rebuild that kind of relationship with at least their core vote. But the press are getting very reform curious. And for a very long time, the Tories have been dependent on the party and the media, as it's often called, the Telegraph, the Mail in particular, not even just because of the people who read the papers, but the fact that the organisations like the BBC will take their cue a lot of the time from those papers in terms of what they report. If they lose those papers, they can't get any coverage even of big conference speeches, whereas Reform were on the front page every day of their conferences. That's very, very dangerous for them. And it's not obvious to see how they get back from that.
And to what extent is it Reform and Farage's personal popularity driving that rather than failings of the current Conservative leadership? My question is whether changing the top brass would have much of an impact at this stage. We know that their poll ratings are dire. The rumours are that they're going to let her do the local elections next year and then knife her. But how much of this is kind of irreversible no matter who's in charge?
It's also the radicalisation of the press through their audience. The audience is no longer people subscribing to the physical newspaper. It's people subscribing online, and their audience is actually increasingly American. It's MAGA-oriented Americans signing up to subscriptions as spectators going in the same way as well. And that is driving them towards content that appeals to that group.
That's really interesting, because I assumed it was just an increasingly elderly group still buying a copy of the Telegraph.
But if you look at the numbers, very few people buy a physical copy of the Telegraph anymore, but it's still profitable. And it's profitable because of online subscriptions. Of course, quite a lot of those are UK and coming from people who might have read the physical paper in the past, but it's a younger audience and it's an international audience, and it's an audience that wants to hear what a dreadful state Britain is in and how we've got Sharia law in London and all of these kinds of stories which that audience laps up. Their young columnists, young think tankers who might write for them are seeing Reform as being a more attractive proposition at the moment. So everything is pulling against the Conservatives. Now, if Jenrick became leader, and he is the favourite to become leader if Badenoch was to go, he would try and drag the party even further in the same direction as Reform.
And this week he's talked about judges in particular and a very Trumpian view.
And his policy on judges, which is essentially that they should have his opinions on things, is aligned with Reform's. Their asylum policy is now basically aligned with Reform's. There's not that much difference on that side of things.
It's further to the right on a couple of things.
In some ways, it's further to the right. He's talked about actually having mass emigration.
Yeah.
Which Farage hasn't yet said. In a way, they're already where he wants them to be because he's kind of shadow leading the party anyway, and it hasn't improved their poll rating. The other thing about Jenrick is he does focus group really badly. Even when people agree with his views, he looks like such a slimeball politician.
Yeah.
He turns off people who like Farage and like Boris Johnson, who don't seem quite so like a normal politician. And Jenrick has been trying to soften that image in various ways. He's been on the Ozempic and all the rest of it, but he would struggle to get past that initial impression people have of him. So I don't see him being the answer to their problems. It does feel like having lost the membership to Reform, having lost the press to Reform, they basically need Reform to blow up now in order to come back. And that is, of course, possible.
Jenrick hasn't ruled out an electoral pact with Reform. Tory members seem keen on it when polled.
Yeah, but are Reform keen on it?
Farage, I don't think, will want to risk victory by snubbing an offer of a free run in his Reform Labour marginals. This is a man that stood down dozens of his Brexit Party MPs for Johnson in 2019. So he isn't averse to doing pacts and deals. So Jenrick's leading the Tories, Farage is leading Reform, and they say, look, neither of us is going to win outright alone, but combined we could, if we don't fight each other in this handful of seats that Reform really need to pinch off Labour. How devastating an impact could that be for progressive Britain?
So obviously anything that united the right would be a problem for Labour and the other progressive parties. But the problem with the idea of a pact, two problems with it. First, it doesn't make any sense for Reform at the moment in terms of where they are. They're currently, if you believe the polling, on track to win 300, 350 seats. There are only 90 seats where they're second to Labour. So why would you stand down in a loads of seats that you're currently on track to win?
Well, because a lot of them are hyper-marginal. When you look at those MRPs, the seats that they're winning, it's by a hair's breadth in a lot of places.
Yeah, but you'd still take the chance of winning 350 seats over a chance of winning 90 seats. When you're the bigger party, you wouldn't let the Tories have the run of all the seats where they're second, because that would just give them more opportunities. The second problem, which is in a way an even bigger problem with it, is a lot of Reform voters hate the Tories. So if you do a pact and it's a public pact, you lose a huge chunk of the Reform vote. Lord Ashcroft,
the Ben Habib outfit or whatever.
Or to not
whoever,
voting. Like, Reform are picking up a lot of non-voters. A lot of those non-voters hate the Conservatives. Lord Ashcroft did a poll where he polled a hypothetical Reform Tory party after merger, and it only did as well as Reform are doing now.
No, so where's the benefit?
Because it was a transfer. A lot of Tories went to this new party, but they lost half of the existing Reform vote. Yeah. Farage actually needs to keep distance from the Tories from his own brand's point of view.
Well, but he's had a lot of defections. So the Reform UK Party has been dripping out this constant drumbeat of defections from the Tories. At least 20, I think, that were counted, various councillors.
I mean, they obviously did that on purpose.
Yeah, exactly. So he's not totally distancing himself from the Tories by making virtue of how many defections
he's
are coming
not,
out.
And they are getting a lot of defections, and their backroom team is full of former Tory advisors, but they're not well known enough to cause him a real problem. He's very carefully said he would not take Boris Johnson or Liz Truss, who are the only two Tories. The only two Tories who are well known enough that it would actually create that brand risk, particularly Liz Truss. I think he's aware of the risk, and as long as he is very clearly the person people associate with Reform, he'll be okay. If you accepted someone that the public do know, like Liz Truss, then that would be a problem for them.
So some observations. The first is we are roughly the same distance from Labour having to call an election as we are from the last pandemic lockdown. Like, conceive of that amount of stuff happening. For me, it's very, very soon to be talking about how the next election will shape up. I think the Tories should be worrying about the elections coming up. And I don't think they're worrying enough, because this kind of received wisdom that we let Kemi do terribly, and I think that is madness. In the Hemingway description of bankruptcy, things fall apart slowly, then suddenly very fast. It seems to me that once you have a sort of critical mass, once enough councillors defect to Reform, there is then something that happens automatically and quite quickly, because they kind of have an agent in each council that can talk to their former Tory Party colleagues and say, come on over, you're going to lose your seat. And I think we might see a massive shift, unless the Tories take action quickly, to stem this bleed in the polls. I think a lot of their councillors will get spooked. And I think that erosion of their base, it's not like they have that many party members. It's the councillors that
they
organise them locally, that do the leaflets and all that stuff.
It was a tiny turnout.
I know.
I mean, but there were more people at Sam's Lib Dem Fringe and my Labour Fringe at those respective conferences than in the entire hall.
And they really need to protect that base.
Here's a stat for you. In 2018, not all that long ago, 60% of councillors in the country were Tory, and it's now 23%. Yeah, and it will be much less than 23% after May.
It might be much less than 23% even before May.
And even before, it's already falling, as you're saying. And that is, as you say, that is a huge problem structurally in terms of their organisation in the country, in terms of people to deliver leaflets. It's a huge problem for them.
And the third observation, I would say, is that Kemi Badenoch is just particularly terrible at this.
That's why I'm asking you, just to be clear.
The reason why I'm saying that is because I don't think that's what your viewers care about. Beth, I think you just asked that question. What I'm here to do at my conference is not talk about where I'm going in May or what's happening.
The reason I ask you,
if I may finish, until those policies bed down, until people understand where we're going.
Half of your members don't think you're the right person to lead them into the next election.
I simply don't believe that.
Your MP, Andrew Rosendale, says he's going to lose his Romford seat to Reform and you need to work together to defeat Labour.
That's what I've done.
Robert Jenrick Jenrick hasn't ruled it out. Rather, he said it's not a priority. Isn't that a sensible approach?
Robert Jenrick is not the leader of the Conservative Party. Neither is Andrew Rossendale. I am.
Do you admire Nigel Farage as a politician?
On what basis?
Do you admire him?
I don't understand your question. I'm not interested in talking about Nigel Farage.
You're announcing 10,000 extra bodies on the beat, tripling stop and search powers. Theresa May restricted the use of those powers. She said at the time they were misapplied and unfair, especially to young black men. Has that changed over the past decade?
Well, I think I'm actually in a very good position to know what black people think.
I don't think we can overestimate just how bad she is at this.
And that makes me really sad. You know, I wanted to in a non-partisan, because I'm not a Conservative way, black woman lead a political party in the UK. I didn't want to think that she would be terrible. I was rooting for her to succeed in her own terms and with a brand of politics I don't agree with. But she was clearly nervous today. There was this odd jittery laugh throughout the whole thing.
And I was listening to people's review of the speech afterwards, like journalists, and they were going, she looked very confident. It's like, what were you watching? It looked like one of the kids that I see auditioning when I'm on the panel for a drama school. Her voice had absolutely no support. Her hands were constantly shaking. I don't know.
She's got no authority in the party either. I mean, Jenrick is essentially running the party.
None.
Can I just throw something at? There's one thing that we've not touched on yet, and that's the finances of the Conservative Party versus the finances of Reform, I suppose, in particular. The Tories' finances haven't collapsed yet. I mean, they still made $3 million in the first quarter of this year, which is a whole lot more than the Reform. And a lot of what Reform made this year was actually loans that had been announced previously. Yeah. So while there's a collapse has been happening month after month amongst Tory support, amongst, every aspect of the Conservative Party, their finances yet don't seem to have reached that critical point where they don't have the money to do the job properly, which in a general election is absolutely...
I mean, the bookies are still giving out 7-1 or 13-2 were the two I saw for them coming top at the next election. So in a way, they're underpriced, because I think actually with a different leader, I can very easily see a universe where dislike for Starmer plus Reform imploding under proper scrutiny when they have to explain policies, etc. I can really very easily see a universe where the Tories do quite well at the next election. But they have to kind of take action now. And so they're probably a good bet still. Do you know what I mean?
At that price, you'd game it, wouldn't you?
Exactly. Yeah. For a relatively small amount, you can buy influence into a party that will probably be again in power at some point soon.
I mean, the interesting thing about the finances, there's a couple of interesting points there. First is a lot of the money they've got has come from one person.
Yeah.
2 million quid has come from this guy called Jez San, who's a computer games entrepreneur. That seems to have been Badenoch's main achievement as leader, has been making friends with this guy who's given them 2 million quid. And they were they still are in financial difficulty, but they were on the verge of bankruptcy when she took over. So she has got them to a more stable position, even if it's through this one guy. But the other point is, it is very interesting that Reform are really struggling to raise any money. And the money that they have raised has been mainly from their own rich people in the party, Nick Candy, Richard Tice. They are not getting money from businessmen, having made big promises about how they were going to. It's a signal of a broader weakness, which is businesses and wealthy people look at their agenda and think this is going to spook the bond markets even more than anything Rachel Reeves is going to do. And they are going to need to get a grip on that if they want to get to a place where they look serious for an election.
Quiet Riot. Once upon a mundane morning, Barb's day got busy without warning. A realtor in need of an open house sign. No, 50 of them, and designed before 9.
My head hurts.
Any mighty tools to help with this plight?
Aha!
Barb made her move. She opened Canva and got in the groove.
Bulk creating Canva sheets. Create 50 signs fit for suburban streets.
Done in a click, all complete.
Sweet!
Now, imagine what your dreams can become when you put imagination to work at canva.com.
Quiet Riot.
Naomi, for months, Badenoch refused to say what was the party's policy on the ECHR because she kept saying that announcing things on the hoof was the old way, the old Brexit way, and she was going to do some deep thinking about the consequences of what she was going to do. So how's that going?
Well, she confirmed that she will take the country out of the ECHR.
To nobody's shock.
To nobody's shock, following hot on Jenrick's heels. But she went further. In her speech, she said we would also tear up the Human Rights Act. But prior to the big speech and during media interviews, when challenged on, OK, so if you leave the ECHR, well, what is the interplay then with the Brexit deal, the TCA, Trade and Cooperation Agreement, and the Windsor Framework? And she said, 12 months notice and we can leave it all. We can walk away from it all. Yes, I mean, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement that former Conservative Prime Minister Boris Johnson negotiated, and best written polling showing that even current Tory voters, so not the ones that abandoned them off to reform, but the very few still sticking with them, think that Brexit's been a failure and has hurt the economy. So this just does not feel like an issue that can turn her fortunes around. And we often say of Labour, look, you can't out-reform reform on immigration. I don't think she can out Farage on Brexit either, but it seems like that's what she's trying to do.
Do you think much deep thinking went into that one?
I think they
that
saw
it would
some...
take us effectively to no deal?
They saw some memes on X and went, that'll do. Talk about spooking the markets to totally tear up the TCA at the moment that we will have just hopefully signed some proper deals on alignment with agri-food, energy, defence, and potentially even more, would presumably be catastrophic.
They got David Wolfson, Lord Wolfson, to write a 200-page report on leaving the ECHR to try and give intellectual justification. And it is actually quite interesting because he basically, if you read between the lines, he basically clearly doesn't think it's a very good idea, but he's written how you would do it.
Yeah.
And his argument on the TCA is, yes, it breaks the agreement, but Europe's response would be proportional because they're not going to rip up the whole trade agreement just because of this one thing, because it hurts them as well. Firstly, that's a big risk to take.
Yeah.
But secondly, even if it's proportional, there's a lot of stuff they can do to hurt us, which isn't ripping up the whole agreement. Just withdrawing security cooperation, which is probably the first thing they do. In reality, if you get either a Tory or Reform government that run on taking us out of ECHR, they're very quickly going to find it's more painful than they're saying it is at the moment. And it doesn't actually solve the problem that they are arguing it solves around immigration, because there are lots of other things in the law that judges would go to stop some of their immigration policies.
But Jenrick doesn't want those judges to be judges.
Sorry, yes, they would be only Jenrick-approved judges will be allowed.
He did this kind of weird impression of Rod Hull and Emu, where he held up a judge's wig.
And you got the impression that he wears that wig in private.
Thanks for that image.
I mean,
That's
I'm
lovely
sorry,
to imagine.
but
I'm so sorry, Sam.
There is stuff goes on around that
I'm going
wig.
to have nightmares.
So he kind of used it as a puppet in his speech to decry activist judges who favour open society. Yet we are meant to believe that this is the party of law and order. Just so many of the messages conflict now with their policy statements.
And I think that this sort of point about chasing reform, there is 20 to 25% of the electorate who are extremely opposed to immigration, will accept, frankly, anything to make it go down, including a lot of authoritarian measures. There's 20 to 25% who are broadly progressive, broadly supportive of immigration and think this is all horrendous. The big block in the middle are worried about
illegal
immigration. They're worried about border control. They're worried about small boats. But fair enough, because the government's inability to get a grip on it does look bad and does cause problems. They're not like blow everything up to solve this problem, people. No. They're generally quite favourable to legal immigration into jobs that we need more people to do, particularly the NHS, but not only the NHS. So everyone's chasing the same 20-25% and forgetting that actually that big block of 50%, who are the ones who are up for grabs, if you like, are not in that place.
And we see a lot of research showing that when you ask people about the kind of meta immigration issue, they're a bit concerned about it. And when you ask them, and in your local area, in your local community, most people go, no, not a problem. And that's because most Brits don't live in areas that have got very, very high levels of immigration.
Yeah, I think you have,
and those that do kind of like it.
You have places that have very high immigration, like London, very, very mixed, where actually there tends to be the most support for immigration, the most progressive types of people. You have areas where there is almost no immigration, where you have a lot of hostility to the prospect of it. And then you do have communities where you've had use of hotels, HMOs, housing for asylum seekers, where they're not used to having much immigration, where that has created a lot of tension. But that's quite a small range of places. So again, it's a misreading of where the public...
And I think, again, actually, looking down the road, there is a reality in which Labour have done relatively well sort of getting the numbers down, dealing with the boat crossings, etc., etc. And then suddenly the next election is not fought on immigration, but is fought on the economy. And the sensible Tory leader that has positioned them well on the economy can do really, really well, while reform suddenly looks relatively irrelevant. And I don't think there is enough of that multi-level planning for the different outcomes.
And one of the really interesting questions over the next few years is, we've seen immigration into Europe drop massively over the last 2 years. That hasn't yet flowed through into channel crossings, but if it does, and Labour are able to build on the deal that they've done with the French, yes, you could see those numbers fall quite a bit. Reform and the Tories will still try and make it into an issue, but it will be harder if the numbers have fallen. Legal immigration is definitely going to fall. We can already see that happening.
Oh, it's already halved.
It's already halved, and it will fall more, to the point where it actually might start to become a problem.
And that will speak markets.
So,
while we're talking about the rhetoric of politicians who will try and whip up certain communities to fear immigration more than they already do, Alex, can we just take a moment to review Jenrick and his remarks about, I haven't seen a white face for 90 minutes. You dug into the original video that was filmed, I think, several months ago.
Everyone got quite outraged about the comment itself. By the way, I would put good money on Jenrick leaking that recording out himself because it's dominated basically Tory conference. So there's very little doubt in my mind that because he was getting little traction with the noises he was making, he wanted to supercharge it. But I went and looked at the actual video that he was talking about making, about litter in various Birmingham neighbourhoods.
It was just linked to the bin crisis.
It was during the bin strike, so obviously it was bad and looked bad. But the point is, in the video, you can see loads of white people walking around to start with, But also, every single person that Jenrick interviewed was white. The thrust of the little film was that these people, who shall be unnamed, but let me give you a little audio cue. Every time they did shots of rubbish, there was a mullah's call to prayer in the background. I shit you not. That video is 10 times worse from what he actually said at that dinner. 10 times worse, a dog whistle. And so you get the shots of the rubbish with a mullah in the background, and then interviews with white people sort of picking up litter and trying to sort out their community and railing against the people who have no respect for this country. If his excuse was that this was a factual thing that I just said because when I made the video, that's what I observed, it's a fucking lie, and that video was not so much a dog whistle, but a foghorn. So I didn't share it and wouldn't share it because the last thing I want to do is give him traffic. But take my word for it, it's worse than what you were saying at that dinner party.
Well, to cheer ourselves up, we need a call to action. And it's a very simple one. Head over to Sam's Substack. You probably already have. The whole world seems to be subscribed. But if you're one of the few people that hasn't yet, head on over there. The link is in the show notes. And you'll also be able to buy his brilliant book in our bookshop. Make sure you head over.
Yeah, and bookshop.org do ebooks now as well. So I've added both the paperback and the ebook version. Final thing. It's not a new lesson, but it is an enduring one, I feel, and one that apparently needs regular reminders. Do not try to do jokes if you're a politician who can't really do jokes. Here is Shadow Home Secretary and haunted Disney candlestick, Chris Philp, trying.
And I turned to my wife and I said, in your wildest dreams, did you ever imagine you'd be leaving a general election count with your husband having just been elected as a Member of Parliament? She turned to me and replied and said, in my wildest dreams, you don't feature. When Keir Starmer talks about a one-in, one-out policy, it turns out he didn't mean illegal immigrants, he meant Home Secretaries. Labour spent their conference plotting to replace Keir Starmer, who believes nothing, with Andy Burnham, who apparently believes anything.
Learning through play starts with Lego Duplo. With Lego Duplo, toddlers can develop real-life skills while having fun with colorful bricks made just for them. Large, easy to grip, and safe to explore. When children express themselves with Lego Duplo, they build patience, problem-solving, and empathy. See your child learn perseverance and self-expression with everything they imagine and create. Visit lego.com/preschool to learn more.
Quiet Riot.
Listeners, don't ever let it be said that we don't respond to your pleas. After the latest resignation of a French PM on Monday, you absolutely inundated us with demands to hear from our regular French correspondent, Olivier Morel, for his hot takes on what this all means for Macron. We have delivered. Earlier on, Naomi spoke to our favourite Chevalier about everything happening en France.
Welcome back to Quiet Riot, Olivier. Thank you so much for joining me.
Lovely to be with you.
Since the news broke that France has lost yet another prime minister, I can tell you, Olivier, we have received dozens of messages from our listeners saying, get Olivier on the phone. We need to know what all of this means.
No pressure.
For the benefit of those listening at home who have been far too engrossed in other news, on Monday, the French government collapsed yet again, and that spooked the markets with the prospect of a fresh election. So Macron's latest appointment, now former Prime Minister Le Cornu, didn't even manage to stay in post for as long as that famous lettuce Liz Truss. Olivier, Macron's governments have been unable to pass legislation, particularly on reining in public spending. Parliament has effectively stagnated for what seems like a very long time now. Let me start by asking you, has France just become ungovernable?
It looks like it. Some years ago, you may remember, Belgium didn't have a government for, I think, well over a year, and France was sniggering, and some saying, look, a country doesn't need a government, things carry on. So I think it's a bit of schadenfreude now, perhaps, for the Belgians. On a serious note, this is a very valid question. And I think as the then ex-future Prime Minister said quite soberly on Monday when he spoke very briefly to explain his reasoning, he said everyone is behaving, everyone meaning all political parties, are behaving as if they have a majority and want to apply their program. In other words, they're totally incapable of compromising. And I've heard over the last few days several MPs and various politicians from all camps adopting a sort of, very grave tone and now is the time to, etc., compromise and the crisis. But yet it's for others to compromise. Ungovernable, yes, I think it's coming to that conclusion. Yes, correct.
Just before we jumped on to record with each other, I saw breaking news that Le Cornu thinks that he can bring people to the table by Macron's imposed deadline of close of play Wednesday. The show goes out on Thursday, so I guess we'll see. And we always run the risk of being desperately out of date on these fast-moving events when we record ahead of time. But let's talk about market reaction, because this latest collapse does create huge uncertainty, and the markets like nothing less than uncertainty. So are concerns about the economic impact of this government collapse justified or overblown?
It is a serious issue. Le Monde was running an article yesterday saying that the uncertainty so far, and they're a serious newspaper, how the uncertainty has cost 0.3% of GDP so far. The debt to GDP ratio is 116%. The euro is down as a result, which means more expensive price for importing goods. And France is a big importer, has a huge export deficit, so it's not good news. Another couple of signs, and interesting ones, the stats for temping staff, which had been a bellwether for a healthy French economy, show a marked slowdown. And the other one, which you might find amusing, but is a very serious piece of research by Les Echos, which is a sort of French FT, is that Japanese housewives manage the savings of Japan's households are calling for savings to be pulled out of French investment.
Wow.
Again, it sounds trivial. It's not. Whilst France is enmeshed in this kind of negotiating of, surviving, literally, it's not week by week, but it's hour by hour, the rest of the world is looking on.
Well, I want to talk about the rest of the world and the impact beyond French borders of this. France is, of course, a leading player in the G7. It's the EU's only nuclear power, permanent member of the UN Security Council, and has been a political force driving EU affairs, rivaled only by the might of Germany. And while Macron is not yet dead, he is clearly badly wounded. And there are fears that the issues where he had been showing a lot of leadership, Ukraine, Gaza, for instance, may now be fatally weakened. So can you just talk us about the repercussions beyond France of all of this uncertainty?
Yes, we've just touched on the economy, and I think there is a very serious issue there. The rating agency and whoever ends up lending money to France taking a dim view of this. You talk about quite rightly about the French president's sort of leadership role in various international crises. Oddly, this has been going on since Parliament was dissolved in July 2024, and that hasn't really stopped him, and that's perhaps a paradox. But he's done the recognition of Palestine, which initially was isolated and managed to drag the UK, Canada, a lot of other countries have followed suit. And if anything, his position on Ukraine and against Putin has hardened. In the early days of the war, he was still trying to play peacemaker and trying to see whether he could
we remember.
And he was sort of, some people, I think slightly unfairly, accused him of, being a bit too weak and going, spending all these hours with us very long table talking to Putin. We have the French expression, to talk to the devil, you have to have a very long spoon. And meaning you have to talk to everybody. If you want to broker peace, you have to talk to your enemies. Otherwise, nothing happens. Anyway, I'm very much hoping that the economic picture is truly worrying, but on this sort of diplomatic front, somehow he thinks, and that leads me, I suppose, to the next question you might ask is the question on everyone's lips. Will he resign?
Yeah, indeed. So his term is meant to end in 2027?
27, that's right. And that's kind of neat segue because it's an opportunity to look at what are the options now, what's going to happen. What Le Cornu sort of hinted at this morning, I was listening to him, he said very little, in effect. People thought, actually, why did he speak? The only thing he said of kind of semi-substance was that perhaps the spectre of another dissolution of Parliament was receding, whether that's just words or I don't know. Would it solve anything? It's almost guaranteed that Parliament would be as divided. Perhaps a slight, it's like a Rubik's Cube, recomposition, but actually you don't solve the Rubik's Cube. He could, I suppose, appoint a new prime minister from the left, because after all, he's had 3 prime ministers from the centre-right, Barnier, Bayrou, and Le Cornu, who is a close ally, and I suppose right, centre-right, if I can call it like this. People call him the last Gaullist. But then you'd end up with the same problem, Parliament, the left side of Parliament would again stop anything. Something that hasn't been talked about, I haven't heard much, but a sort of technical non-partisan PM, a la Mario Draghi, seemed to work for Italy. But I'm a little pessimistic because I think a technical prime minister like Mario Draghi would be held by left-wing parties as, a tool of, capitalism and the right and the rich and etc. So, who do you appoint as a highly competent but impartial? I don't know.
And so the likelihood of Macron himself having to go, where does that stand today?
Yes, that's an interesting one. So just brief history. It happened twice, actually, that 2 presidents, one resigned, one died in office. And I've heard people say, it's going to take, an election will take forever, etc. Actually, a new election has to take place within 20 to 35 days from vacancy being residential death. And de Gaulle resigned in 1968, and a president was elected quickly afterwards. Even more unexpected, Georges Pompidou in 1974 died on the 2nd of April, and the new president was elected on the 19th of May. My first reaction to is he going to resign is it's really not in his DNA to do that at all. Touching back on the international stage, I think he strongly believes he has a role to play. And he's always said, I'll carry on until 2027, come what may. A couple of things to put into that mix that are kind of new in the last literally 2 or 3 days is 2 of his former prime ministers are sort of calling for his resignation. Edouard Philippe, who was his first prime minister, openly said, let's find a prime minister who can just do the bare minimum to pass a budget, which is the big issue. And then he should do the decent thing for, not in so many words, but was he? And Gabriel Attal has again kind of, not in so many words, but suggested that he does not understand what the president does anymore. So he's obviously putting distance between it. So that's quite new to have his own camp. No one had done that before, say these things. And there's the polls show a majority of French people who want him to resign. But that's in a way is not so new, because he's reached level of unpopularity that are just unprecedented.
And so just talk us through where the polls currently are for each of the parties, and if you wouldn't mind explaining whether that party is left, centre-right, etc., for listeners that might not be fully aware.
No party has a majority. The biggest party in parliament at the moment is Marine Le Pen's Rassemblement National. There's a sort of loose coalition that is already has been fragmenting and it looks like not getting back together. Is the France Unbowed, La France Insoumise, which is a hodgepodge of it goes from it used to go from the socialists, the Green, the extreme left, the communists. They're squabbling among themselves. They don't even want to be in the same room. I mean, this is as pathetic as this. None of them would reach a majority. So even if you have a new election, that's what I'm saying, there will not be a new parliament. Just picking the two traditional, I suppose, parties of government over the last 50 years, the socialists on the one side and the Républicains on the other side. So the Républicains are the Conservatives and the Socialists, as obviously, are Labour. Both candidates at the last presidential election in 2022 polled in single figures. So they've basically disappeared as political force. And just as an anecdote, when Le Cornu resigned, he announced his government on Sunday night. And quickly afterwards, the senior member of this government, that was basically the same government almost again, actually said, no, I wasn't made aware that so-and-so was going to join the government, someone of his own camp, and that brought down the government of a few hours.
Wow.
It shows a level of kind of infighting. They're not even disagreeing with the other side or the other side, because there are many other sides. They're fighting among themselves, within their own party. I mentioned the Socialist Party. There's a very fractious relationship between different factions. There's always been, but it used to be a party of government, whereas they managed to fight amongst a handful of MPs. So even if, say, he resigns, there's new elections, there's a new president, then you have to have a parliament. And again, there's no sign that the new parliament would be any different. So changing the man or the woman at the top may not be the result that everyone hopes.
Well, you mentioned the woman at the top. So final question for you, Olivier. Where do things currently stand for Marine Le Pen in terms of being able to run in a presidential election, whether all the way in 2027 or sooner?
Very good question. Her appeal against the conviction, just to remind listeners, she has been convicted of diverting European funds to fund her own party. She's been barred from standing for election, and that appeal is due to be heard in the summer of 2026. If the election takes place in 2027, and if she's cleared, which is by no means guaranteed, most legal specialists say the appeal is going to confirm the conviction. But if she were cleared, she could run. If the election is run in the next month or two, she couldn't. So bizarrely, although she's the archenemy of the current president,
no one wants to delay the presidential election.
She would like that to be. Yes, resign, but not just now. It's kind of and if I can add one last thing, I think it's so stuck, that you think there needs to be some kind of crisis, and you think, political sort of fiction, would a far left or far right president be a Liz Truss or Giorgia Meloni moment? And I'll leave you with that thought.
Well, thank you very much. And you are leaving us with that thought, Olivier, but things are moving so rapidly.
Then really so rapidly, when you come to air tomorrow, on Thursday.
We'll have to call you for an update, I'm sure.
Possibly, yes.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Listeners, love hearing from you. And I've got a hunch that they're going to be wanting to hear from you a little more frequently.
I'd be delighted. I wish I wouldn't have to talk about this all the time, but yes,
but here we are.
Happy to.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Naomi.
Thank you, Naomi and Olivier. Listeners, we'll bring you an extra Grin and Share It at the weekend in our Sunday School edition to make up for not having one today.
At Blinds.com, it's not just about window treatments. It's about you, your style, your space, your way. Whether you DIY or want the pros to handle it all, you'll have the confidence of knowing it's done right. From free expert design help to our 100% satisfaction guarantee, everything we do is made to fit your life and your windows. Because at Blinds.com, the only thing we treat better than windows is you. Visit Blinds.com now for up to 40% off site-wide and free professional installation. Rules and restrictions apply.
Now, this week, the world marked 2 years from that horrific attack by Hamas on civilians in Israel, in which over 250 people were taken hostage and over 1,200 were killed. Our bloodthirsty enemies have hit us hard, but they have not broken us, Netanyahu said on Tuesday. But the capacity for indiscriminate violence, it seems, is not confined to any one side in that region. The offensive launched by Israel on Gaza has, according to UN estimate, claimed 65,000 Palestinian lives, including many thousands of women and children. A United Nations expert panel published a report last month that concluded Israel has committed genocide against the Palestinian people. Meanwhile, one of the depressingly predictable side effects of the situation there is a wave of anti-Semitism across the world. Recent research by the Community Security Trust found there had been a doubling of incidents of anti-Semitism last year compared to the average of the decade before, and this year we are on trend for that average to triple. After a terrorist attacked the Heaton Park Synagogue in Manchester last week with fatal consequences, the most commonly echoed sentiment among British Jews was, "We had been expecting something like this," which I found just utterly heartbreaking. As we record what are described as technical talks around the 20-point Trump peace plan are in their third day, the mood music is encouraging. Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and envoy Steve Witkoff have both flown to Egypt, so that would seem to indicate to me that the Trump regime is associating themselves with the result, and lists of prisoners to be exchanged for hostages are being considered. But as Sam's father, Lawrence Freedman, wrote on their Substack this week, one never goes too far wrong by being pessimistic about the Middle East. Does Trump deserve credit, despite his unorthodox style, for getting us this far?
Yes, he does deserve some credit. He should have done it a lot earlier than he's done it. Broadly, what is being proposed is something that was always going to be the only way of ending this from day one of the Israeli invasion. And frankly, Trump could have pushed it and the Americans could have pushed it a lot earlier, and it would have saved many lives had they done so. But Trump is the only person who has any leverage over Netanyahu. Netanyahu doesn't particularly want this war to stop. He's trying to hold together a very disparate and fractious coalition in Israel, which includes some extremely far-right politicians who want to eradicate, have openly said they want to eradicate Gazans. If the war stops, it will be harder for him to do that and harder for him to hold off another election and a lot of other controversies that he's dealing with. The only person that can stop him is Trump. Trump has put a lot of his personal authority into this by essentially forcing Netanyahu to agree, which he didn't want to do, to the plan, and saying no to a lot of changes Netanyahu wanted to make to the plan, by forcing Netanyahu to phone the Qataris and apologise for the bombing of Doha. Netanyahu has never apologised for anything in history. Yeah. And also, as part of the plan, Trump would be the chair of the organisation, the transitional authority. Now, obviously, while he would not be doing any of the work, the fact that he's put his name in that role would make it very difficult for the Israelis to then cause trouble for the transitional authority because he's the only person who has leverage over them. So he has put a lot of his personal authority into this. And he's desperate for the Nobel Peace Prize. He's made no bones about that. So, and this is his sort of pitch for that as well. So there's a sort of, as ever, there's a narcissistic element with him. If he wasn't involved and if he hadn't put his authority on that, there would be no way of getting Israel to sign up to this agreement. So to that extent, it's been valuable.
Ended 7 wars, at least half of them was because of my ability at trade and because of tariffs. If I didn't have tariffs to throw around a little bit, you would have at least 4 wars raging right now with thousands of people a day being killed that aren't happening. We've settled. We settled 7. We're getting close to settling 8. That would be a big one.
So is it possible that this could succeed? I mean, it's very much a sort of 2-stage process. The second stage is peace in the world. That's a long way off, it seems to me, and many a slip twixt cup and lip. But at least in its first thing, which is to stop the killing that's going on now, does it have a reasonable chance of success?
It will depend on the Americans and how much pressure they put on Israel, because Israel will be in these negotiations trying to find ways to change the terms so that Hamas are forced to say no. Their objective will be to force Hamas to say no. Hamas's objective is to agree a set of terms they can live with. But as long as the Americans basically sit on Israel and say you have to stick to more or less the agreement as planned.
But after the agreement as well, because a lot of the worry in the Palestinian side of things is that once they give up all the hostages, then what happens if in 2 weeks
and we have had
Israel decides to just flatten everything?
Yeah, and we have had that. Steve Witkoff, Trump's envoy, made an agreement with Hamas, which Israel then did not follow through on a few months ago. So they will be worried about that. But if they are prepared to sit on Israel and really try and force it, Hamas are in a pretty weak position. They're also internally split, Hamas as well, but they're in a pretty weak position now. They will sign up to anything that allows them to survive in some capacity, I think, at this stage.
And what do we think about Tony Blair's involvement?
I try to think of it as little as possible, to be honest. I mean, look, it's part of Tony Blair's personal atonement, isn't it? I mean, that much is clear to me, that he's trying to find some sort of way to repair his legacy from the Iraq war. But he's not particularly well respected in that region. So it seems to me he's once again putting his own needs before what needs to happen. But,
the thing that he did that was useful in this process was getting Kushner on board. He sold the plan to Jared Kushner, who then sold it to Trump.
And kind of drafted it from the looks of things.
He drafted the plan, sold it to the Americans. So he has played an important role in getting us there. The more active and public his involvement, the more problematic that's going to be, because, as you say, he does not have a great reputation in the region for good reason. But it's not just a sort of weird name that's just appeared in the frame. It was his team that developed this plan, essentially.
Keir Starmer is in India, as we record this today, flew out with the press pack, and they flew directly over Gaza. And I think a lot of the lobby journalists were quite shocked looking out the window as to what they could see below them and just the sheer scale of devastation.
I mean, there's nothing left standing.
No. Last week, there was, of course, the attack on the synagogue in Manchester. There has also been an attack on a mosque that's happened since, though not with the fatal consequences that happened in Manchester. I was reflecting on the anti-racism rhetoric in Starmer's speech to Labour Party conference. He was very, very heavy on the anti-racism angle.
A vile individual committed a terrorist attack that attacked Jews because they are Jews and attacked Britain because of our values.
Our first thoughts are with the families of those people who died, those injured and those traumatised by this and horrific anti-Semitic attack on our Jewish friends and neighbours. We condemn it outright.
I am horrified by the anti-Semitic terrorist attack at a synagogue on the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. My prayers are with the victims and the families of all of those who were murdered here.
So many Jewish families first came to this country as a place of refuge, fleeing the greatest evil ever inflicted on a people. And Britain welcomed them, provided safety, but also the security that comes from a promise that this is a country that stands up to hatred.
Is he doing enough, do we think, to back up those words with action? He did, of course, visit the scene of the synagogue, but has been more or less travelling since then. I'm kind of reminded of Gordon Brown, who would do a great speech but then retreat. And given how big an issue xenophobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia are now within certain communities in the UK, do we actually almost need the Prime Minister to make that his day job for a while, at least, to kind of solidify those words into very meaningful leadership on bringing us together?
I think the British Prime Minister has never had quite the same job as consoler-in-chief that the American president has, that the head of state...
Well, other than when Diana died and Blair had to step in because the royal family was so bad at it.
Because they were sort of absent. But that was unusual. That exception kind of confirms the rule. And seeing how David Lammy was treated when he visited the area, it just feels like political involvement would just make it even more polarized and more hostile. what they need, I think, is community involvement and maybe regional involvement. So maybe Andy Burnham, actually, instead of, going around trying to boost his own chances of the leadership, maybe that should be his full-time job. Because it seems to me that local and regional leaders have a better connection to the community and better reputation, usually locally. But it's hard because, if David Lammy went to a thing protesting the genocide in Gaza, he'd be booed in that.
One of the things I was going to say, as someone who is Jewish, the Jewish community is very divided at the moment, more divided than I've ever seen it. I mean, not about the attack on the synagogue, which obviously we're all horrified by, but about the relationship with Israel.
Yeah.
I did not like seeing David Lammy being booed and attacked for something which is not his fault. And more than ever, I mean, historically, the community has been very supportive of Israel, but the sheer violence of what's happened in Gaza has pushed a lot of people into a position that's very uncomfortable of believing in Israel as an idea, but being horrified by what the current government of Israel is doing. So it's quite difficult for government to then navigate between these different positions and find the right rhetoric, which is what Lammy's rhetoric was pretty vague, because it's how do you find the right words when the community itself doesn't even agree on the issue at all?
Are there right words? I mean, I
think it's very difficult.
I think we all found it difficult.
I wanted to
talk about October 6th. Yeah.
Sort of marking October the 7th, and I just found it impossible to craft something that didn't ignore what had gone on since then, but also didn't, both sides did.
Yes.
And it's just, you see, what I hear privately from practically every British Jewish friend is that the one person that has done the most to make Jews unsafe around the world in the last 2 decades is Benjamin Netanyahu. But that's not something that I hear publicly, certainly not enough and not forcefully enough. So is it maybe that Jewish progressives need to take a more active and vocal
I think
stand?
It's incredibly... So Stephen Bush wrote a great article in the FT about this weird cognitive dissonance that I think a lot of British Jews, I certainly wouldn't speak for everybody, but speak for myself at least, feel about this, where, as I say, you do believe in Israel as an idea, and you're very worried about speaking out against the idea or giving the impression of speaking out against the idea because of the damage that could do to friends, family who live there, to people who might want to move there, to the idea itself, but at the same time are horrified by the behaviour of the government there. And I think a lot of the time you would just end up, as you did with that post, by just not saying anything, because it's so difficult to find the right way of framing all of that all of those conflicting emotions. It is worth saying that Netanyahu, I think, has broken a relationship with the diaspora, at least for more liberal Jews, both here and in America, that is in the long term going to be enormously damaging for Israel, because particularly in America, that diaspora is what has led president after president after president to be supportive. Trump is already putting a lot of pressure on them in this situation, and Trump is still relatively supportive. The next Democrat president is not going to feel the same kind of pressure that Biden and even Obama felt, because they've broken that link with a large part of the diaspora.
First time we've seen polling from America with the majority of people not supportive of Israel, which I've never seen in my life.
And it's incredibly sad. And it's incredibly sad to see the loss of international support, which has been happening for a long time, but has been exacerbated by this war, because the idea is incredibly important and meaningful to Jewish people, given what happened in the Holocaust and the origin story of Israel as a country. I would dearly love to see Israel elect a different prime minister, but politics there has shifted so hard to the right that even a different prime minister is not going to get us back to anywhere near where we were in the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, we're
just so far away from that now.
We were talking about it a few weeks ago, that we're now discussing someone like Naftali Bennett as a sort of slightly more moderate,
which is crazy
option, which is genuinely
completely crazy.
One last thing. There is also a kernel of anti-Semitism under that surface, though, isn't it? Because people do find it particularly hard to separate the actions of Israel, to not somehow attach responsibility for them on all Jews. Why is that, do you think?
It's true, and any British Jew will tell you, like, I wrote a piece for The Observer about what happened in Manchester, and under the article, comment after comment, what about Gaza, as if I'm personally responsible for it, when I was writing about an incident of anti-Semitism in the UK, and that happens every time I talk about anti-Semitism. I'm a trustee of the Holocaust Educational Trust. Last year, Keir Starmer was our guest speaker at our big annual dinner, and I posted sort of a picture and just said, great to have the Prime Minister's support. And just I got one of the most aggressive responses I've ever had on social media, of just people sort of saying, what about Gaza, what about Gaza? And that is a form of anti-Semitism, because I'm not responsible for what's happening, because I don't like Netanyahu. But it should, even if I did, it still doesn't make me responsible. And people cannot, this is a left problem, that there's also a far-right problem with anti-Semitism, of course, as well, but this is a problem on the left.
There is a huge problem with anti-Semitism on the far right, but Yaxley Lennon is trying his level best to, make it a cause for right-wing Jews to get behind in the face of Islamophobia.
Some of his record on anti-Semitism.
It's horrendous. Of course it is.
Any Jew who thinks having Tommy Robinson anywhere near us is absolutely demented, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Right, so let's do a call to action. So the Community Security Trust, or CST, is an apolitical charity that protects British Jews by providing the things that Jewish schools and synagogues across the UK shouldn't need, but do, like security advice, equipment like hardened doors, anti-shatter windows, etc. And I would suggest to our listeners that is a very worthy cause to support.
And maybe also the HET, the Holocaust Education Trust.
Yeah, always looking for support too.
We will put a link to both in the show notes.
All right, folks, it's that time again, the part of Quiet Riot, where we take a look at what's been enraging social conservatives since our last show. Here, as always, it's our own watchdog of the zeitgeist to tell us
from his sins
what's got the culture war nutters into a frenzy this week. It is, of course, time for Wokey Dokey.
Wokey Dokey.
Alex, what have you got for us?
Our woke schools should focus on education, not feelings, writes Celia Walden in the Telegraph. So this is all about the Be Well survey, which Celia tells us is part funded by taxpayers. It's not. It's just that schools help distribute and collect it on behalf of the charity, so there's some admin cost, I imagine. And currently being given to children as young as 11 in secondary schools across the country. Again, it's not.
The Be Well survey.
Yeah, the Be Well. It's spelled like B as
it started in Manchester, so they used
Got it.
And so this is not the thing to understand about this, which will make a lot of what is about to follow seem particularly mad, is that the special thing about this particular survey is that it's designed by people that age, working with a charity. So they've come up with a question to try and get some data on how kids are feeling. Celia is very cross with this for a number of reasons. First of all, because it quizzes children on gender identity. But there's all kinds of stuff in scare quotes, like life satisfaction is in scare quotes. Emotions are in scare quotes. Self-esteem is in scare quotes, as if all these things are just invented by the liberal elite. And you get quite a lot of glimpses into maybe something that has formed her opinions in that direction. For instance, she writes, suddenly, teachers are insisting your child is not just dreamy or distracted, but suffering from ADHD. So God knows what's gone on in Celia's past to make her feel that way. I mean, I did at some point find out that she's married to Piers Morgan.
Right.
So, which reminded me of Elizabeth Bennet's reaction to Lady Catherine de Bourgh when she says that makes your ladyship's situation at present more pitiable, but it will have no effect on my opinion. Basically, she mainly disagrees with the whole style of not asking questions, but giving statements with which you can
agree strongly,
disagree strongly, or whatever, which is just like a stylistic thing. She hates the fact that they are probing children's emotions, because she keeps saying again and again that when she was 11, her satisfaction levels were largely based on how many strawberry laces she was allowed to eat. I resent this idea that children have no inner world, basically, which is what she presents. Just give them a bit of pick and
look,
mix.
It's all part of keeping children less safe, frankly. The more that we give them the vocabulary to talk about how they're feeling, agency over who can and cannot talk to them about their bodies, touch them, blah, 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 the more empowered we make children to stand up to abuse, and the more this kind of bullshit is like, no, children don't have emotions. They're to be completely protected from anything that might be considered, outside the realm of acceptability to us.
Your field, I guess, before you became a commentator on wider political issues was in education, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm an education policy nerd by training. And I know the guys who do the Be Well survey. And it's a great survey because it's our only source of data on a lot of this stuff. Government doesn't collect much data on sort of children's well-being and mental health and so on, and their lives. So it's actually a fantastic resource. And it's really important because we've seen a massive surge in the number of children being referred to the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service over the last decade, 15 years. It was already rising, and then during the pandemic it went up a lot, and it hasn't come down. And a lot of schools are really struggling with this because they don't have the resources to deal with it. They can't get the referrals. You have to have a very high level now of need to get a referral. You have to sort of be at the level of suicidal ideation to get a referral in a lot of parts of the country now. And we don't, there are lots of theories as to why this is happening, but we don't really have a grip on it. So we desperately need information about what's going on. So the idea that we wouldn't want to ask children about their lives to try and figure out what's going on here.
But there are no question marks in this survey.
I mean, she
keeps talking about there not being
this
enough
is just someone who doesn't understand survey design.
No.
I mean, this is
She's someone who doesn't understand a lot of things, let me tell you. Because her final conclusion, I want you to pay attention to
I'm
this
paying
sentence.
attention.
Very few in the education field have publicly questioned this post-pandemic fetishization of happiness.
Want to see that one more time?
Forbid we'd fetishize happiness. Jeez.
Very few in the education field have publicly questioned this post-pandemic fetishization, to give the full quote, of feelings and happiness.
That's the quote of the year.
So this week, happiness is woke.
Well, that was
happiness
my
is woke.
conclusion, that this week happiness is woke.
Does life bring you joy? Well, be damned.
Yeah. Yes. I've had this tab open on my computer for 10 days now, thinking, should I give it prominence? But this sentence, I just kept rereading it about the fetishization of happiness, which indirectly, of course, also means the Declaration of Independence is woke, but we'll come back. We'll circle back to that one another week.
Thank you, Alex, and listeners. Please keep them coming through to quietrightpod@gmail.com. And that is the end of this week's Quiet Riot. Sam, thank you ever so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
You must come back.
And thank you to everyone at home for tuning in. Don't forget to not only take the actions we share, but do head on over to ko-fi.com/quietrightpod and bung us a few quid if you can. Monthly backers get all sorts of fun invites to hang out with us, and that's on top of the feel-good factor of helping keep this show free at the point of use for those who cannot afford to pay.
We'll be back on Sunday, so until then, keep yourselves safe, keep yourselves sane, and keep yourselves quietly rioting. We love you more than puff pastry. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Alex Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangita. Artwork by Simona Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Sandstone Global.
Quiet Riot. I'm the only punctual one, Sam.
Well, have I not been on time for a recording?
Well, the one with Liam Byrne. Admittedly, there was a tube strike.
But I wasn't late.
No.
I was just not there.
I like that.